The next part of this webinar is called Public Banks, Fossil Fuel Divestment and Community Reinvestment. This portion will be moderated by our own Doug Norland. Doug directs the Economic Policy Program at Friends of the Earth. And Doug, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really great to see everybody today. We've got a great panel to talk about public banks, fossil fuel divestment, and community reinvestment. Our panel considers not only the importance of fossil-free public banks in response to climate change, but also the need for public banking to provide COVID-19 recovery and an economic lifeline for people's needs, such as financing for affordable housing, investment in small businesses, and rebuilding a just economy. We'll also consider how public banks can support energy efficiency and affordable housing, clean energy, and a just transition, as well as other environmental justice priorities. Our first panelist, Reina Tello, is a community organizer with People Organizing to Demand Environmental and Economic Rights, or PODER. Born and raised in San Francisco, Reina campaigns to unite her community to reclaim lands and put them in the people's hands, and to organize for environmental and economic rights and ensure a stable legacy for all future generations. Our second panelist, Sylvia, is Policy Director at Asia Pacific Economic Network, or APEN, and is committed to advancing transformative environmental justice policies through public banking and other means. Sylvia co-wrote the California Public Banking Act, AB 857, and co-founded the California Public Banking Alliance and is an active member of Public Banks East Bay. First, I wanted to kick this off with a very quick background on the importance of public banks in the context of the fossil fuel divestment movement. As many people here know, several years ago, when the larger fossil fuel divestment movement was building up steam, campaigners sought to wean cities funds from Wall Street banks that financed fossil fuel projects that damaged the climate, polluted local environments, and trampled on local, often indigenous communities. Projects like the Dakota Access Pipeline and its damage to the Standing Rock Reservation and human rights and other horrible impacts on the people there provide iconic examples. But campaigners soon realized that there were not alternative banks large enough to handle their billions of dollars in financing that weren't also funding fossil fuel projects. So they set their sights on cities and municipalities as a logical nexus for achieving both fossil fuel divestment and community reinvestment. And in so doing, joined forces with so many other wonderful allies who were already working for years before to create public banks for the public good. The scope of municipal placements in Wall Street banks is huge, but I think it's never been fully estimated across the country. I've been trying to find some statistics, but it's difficult. But we do know that municipalities have been paying Wall Street enormous sums just for the privilege of managing our money. For example, according to Public Bank LA, last year, the city of Los Angeles paid $170 million in banking fees and $1.1 billion in interest to big banks and investors. Also, earlier this week, thanks to PBI, I learned that a report from Action Center on Race and the Economy that researched this and found that interest payments on municipal debt paid by states and sub-state municipalities across the country to Wall Street investors and banks is more than $160 billion a year. Total deposits in Wall Street banks are likely much, much greater. That's a lot of money that can be used for community good rather than destroying climate, environment, and communities. There's got to be a better way, and that's public banks. So Reina, please take it from here and lead us onward.
Sorry about that. Hello and happy Saturday. My name is Reina Tello and I am a community organizer with People Organizing to Demand Environmental and Economic Rights in San Francisco. And a little bit about PODER. Well, our mission is to organize with Latinx immigrant families and youth to put people-powered solutions that are locally based, community-led, and environmentally just. We nurture everyday people's leadership, regenerate culture, and build community power. let's see, what can I say about PODER? Our experience with AB 857 really was a crash course into how legislature was made, and we held many sessions with our members to help them understand what the legislation said, and we took them to the Capitol. And I think I heard earlier in the conversation it be touched on, you know, what can you do locally? And there is many movements up and down the state. I think that's what really helped champion AB 857 was having over 200 organizations join together. And within our network, we are part of a bigger alliance in California, and it's called CEJA. CEJA helped us really understand and demystify the legislation. Something that we faced as a challenge during the legislative process and trying to lobby was that people thought this was something that was so big that, you know, communities couldn't understand, and public banking is something that is so large and larger than life, and it's so complicated. And really what we learned was that in our communities, people understand what co-ops are, and people understand the need for a public bank and something that is here local that can benefit our communities. And so we found that it was actually a lot easier to talk about it with community and have them have a good understanding of what we needed and that this is the right move. I heard earlier in the chat, it was asked, you know, how do we bring more diversity into this space? Well, PODER focuses on the Latinx community. We also work with, you know, the African American community and any other low-income community members here in San Francisco to make sure that, you know, people-powered solutions are being championed. So we brought that aspect with us to AB 857 when we lobbied. And I also saw in the chat earlier, you know, how do we ensure that these public banks are going to be for the public good and that we will have equitable access to the funds. And I think the only way to do that is to keep people involved and have people come with us, right? So not just have the experts, because I mean, what is an expert, right? I think expert is acquired through experience. And I think our membership acquired a lot of experience through the process of pushing this legislature for piece of legislation forward, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions in the chat because it's on a different screen, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I can tell you a bit about public banking and why PODER got involved with public banking. As you can see in our name, economic justice is there. And so we believe in real transformational changes that will advance that equity, right? And so public banking stemmed out of the divest movement when we found out that there was no place to put our money. And so PODER has been involved all along. Personally, what brought me to this work is my family lost our home in the 2008 foreclosure crisis. We saw what that did firsthand to, you know, a lot of families across the nation, thousands of families across the nation. And you really felt powerless, and there was no sense of the bank understanding what was happening on the ground in our communities. And so to me, this is a solution. We heard many, many stories while we were, you know, lobbying for AB 857. We heard about Santa Rosa when the fires happened up there, how Wells Fargo believed that replacing ATM cards and key to lock boxes was enough for the community. And we also heard about how in North Dakota, when they had a natural disaster, they issued a moratorium to help people rebuild, investing in the community, because if the community can't rebuild itself, then there is no money going into these banks, right? So I think those are a couple of things to touch on how important it is to have that local control over our money. So someone mentioned it earlier, so we can divest from fossil fuels and stop killing our planet, and we can invest in, you know, the local schools, growing green spaces. PODER has also been part of championing that here locally. We've acquired 2 sites for affordable housing, but we know that affordable housing is held up because of lack of financing. And so we're hoping that the public bank can provide that and have a more equitable access for affordable housing. And those are things that we're building into what the legislation looks like here locally in San Francisco. We try to make sure and ensure that our mission is as clear as possible so that we can avoid the bad. But like I said, I think the solution is going to be for all of us to stay involved and not see the public banking movement as like, okay, we won and now we can let go. I think it's going to have to be, okay, we won and we've established this and now it's our baby, and we have to raise our kids to understand what it is to keep control of that bank, to keep it going in a positive way. And so always having a like really vigilant eye on what the public bank is doing and ensuring that it's going in the right direction. I'm going to look at the chat to see if there was any questions. Let me see. Oh, somebody dropped in the chat for PODER. Thank you so much. Yes, sorry, California Environmental Justice Alliance, CEJA. I have a really big soft spot for CEJA that taught us so much on how to go through this process, and they were really supportive in helping us push for AB 857. So yes. I don't see any other questions, and I don't know if I'm on time or if I went over. We're doing good? Okay.
Yeah, we're doing great.
I don't see any other questions. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I can continue answering my own. I see somebody has a question.
I just want to thank you for your work on AB 857. I'm really so pleased to be able to actually see you face to face and thank you in person. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody that was there. Let me see if I can find it. Normally for, let's see. Oh no, I can't find it. Normally for our public bank meetings, I have the background from everyone who lobbied for AB 857. It brings back a lot of really good memories because it really wasn't as hard as I thought lobbying was. It's just talking to people about something you're passionate about. And it was so easy to get behind the public banking movement. Let's see. Yes, the connection between co-ops and public banking was actually how our members were able to like re-explain to me what they were understanding. And so it's all interconnected. And I think these are all positive changes for us. Let's see. So somebody said that they voted against AB 857 because it did not provide for local community members to be employed by the bank. That may be a little more of a technical question for somebody else. In the times of COVID, what do we think is a good way to reach out? Is it reach out to folks? I don't think it's a lack of wanting, sorry, I'm answering Susan. I don't think it's a lack of wanting to prioritize public banks in the Latinx community. I think it's how you outreach to folks and really understanding what the community may be going through and just personalizing to that. While we did a podcast for CEJA, or for CJA, I invited folks to take a walk down the street. And right now in my neighborhood, or in the place that I call my neighborhood, is 24th Street. You see a lot of empty businesses, right? We're all going through a financial crisis. And a lot of that is because of the inequitable access to the money. We have a lot of mom and pop shops that are closing down and not really able to survive because they weren't able to get the government loans because those were issued by big banks. And so hoping that that money goes in through the public banks so that the local mom and pop can keep up with the corporations that are trying to move in. And you can see like these businesses opening up and thriving, and you can see people walking around making purchases and being able to patronize these small business small businesses. And I think that if you explain it to people using their environment and what they're working for, I think it's really easy to engage people. I mean, at least that's how I saw it here. And it's about those personal stories, you know, losing our home in the 2008 foreclosure was really rough. And it's something that, you know, if we trace back to the root causes, this addresses that root cause. So it's easy for me to like get involved and get excited and keep pushing through and keep wanting to learn. If I know that I have a personal attachment to it. So maybe that's the best way to recruit, is to understand what people are going through and hearing their side and then engaging them in our work.
Do you see Alona's question about current obstacles? Maybe Doug and Sylvia can chime in about some of the obstacles faced by the movement.
Yeah, and I wonder if it might be a good, that's a good question for everybody and might be a good segue to Sylvia. Reina, unless you have more, maybe we could move to Sylvia and then have general questions for both afterwards.
I mean, I think the only thing I'll add at the end right now is to say that I think people are just scared of things that are new. That's all it is. Because anything that we heard while we were lobbying, you know, still comes up from time to time. You know, how is it safe? And all these questions about safety and protecting the money, when we really know that Wall Street doesn't protect our money and doesn't protect our interests. So I will pass it along to the next person.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Reina. Sylvia, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Let me know if can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm using a different computer, so things are a little different. So that was great, Reina. Just to follow up, I'm Sylvia. I'm the policy director of APEN, Asian Pacific Environmental Network. We're an environmental justice organization based in the East Bay, and we work with low-income, working-class Asian immigrant and refugee communities. Our two organizing bases are Oakland, Chinatown, and Richmond. APEN is also a member of SEHA and CJA. We have a lot of kind of overlap in terms of like our mission with like what PODER does. And I think APEN's interest in public banking is not just it's divestment, but also like PODER, you know, we want to see money invested in our local communities and in like regenerative economic models. Like Reina mentioned, co-ops, you know, like we know that a lot of our community members come from immigrant backgrounds, and in a lot of these cooperative economic structures are familiar to us. They've been used in our communities for generations. So like these are not models that are new to our community. And so it's a great way to bring in more folks in an authentic way. And in terms of environmental justice in particular, you know, there's a lot of power in the divestment angle. That's how I came into this originally, finding out that like there isn't really another bank option for our local government deposits. But then that there's so many opportunities for what a public bank can do to benefit environmental justice communities. So some of the things that we're looking at is, there was some discussion before about bonds and how local governments spend a lot of money in those bond payments, especially the interest payments. And those payments are extractive. They don't benefit the community in any way. It's pure profit for Wall Street. Public banks could replace that mechanism and create bond products that can go to specifically fund the types of like infrastructure that we need to transition the economy to a non-fossil fuel based economy, but one that's based on renewable energy and like alternatives to toxics. So that's like a big opportunity. Another piece is just being able to embed climate risk in investment policies in general. I think that could have a huge effect on, in terms of environmental policy and embedding environmental policy and like how investments are made. And then also just prioritizing lending for climate investments in disadvantaged communities. And so I think a lot of people might not know this. In California, we have this tool called Cal EnviroScreen, which is a mapping tool that ranks different, I think it's census tract level, census tracts based on like how much pollution there is. So that's basically how you identify like the most polluted communities in the state. And so one thing that we're looking at with the state public bank proposal is saying that like lending should be prioritized to those communities because they're the ones who are the most impacted. And then another opportunity we're looking at is what public banks can do for to encourage energy efficiency and affordable housing. Affordable housing, I'm sure everyone in California is aware, is a huge problem. You know, we're in a housing crisis, and a big part of it is not just that there's not enough housing in general, and the housing that exists is not affordable. Renters are increasingly rent burdened, meaning like the share of their income that goes to paying the rent is really high. The numbers that I have were like pre-COVID, but I think you can probably find some estimates now about during the COVID like economic downturn. But it's before COVID, it was about 20% of all households are rent burdened, meaning over 30% of income goes to paying for rent. And for every 100 people in the US who live on an extremely low income, there are only 33 units of affordable housing. So there's just a huge demand for affordable housing. And then at the same time, energy efficiency is also really scarce, and there's a huge demand for it. And it's inequitably distributed. So we find that most low-income renter, communities of color households are living in less energy efficient households than the median household. And low-income renters are paying a much higher proportion of their income to pay for energy. It's about, I saw, again, this was pre-COVID, I saw a statistic that said it was like 500% higher than the median household. So integrating energy efficiency with affordable housing is an equity strategy, as well as, you know, addressing the energy crisis or climate change. So there's a lot of environmental benefits to it. There's a lot of equity benefits to it. The incentives for both energy efficiency and affordable housing are really problematic right now. That's part of why there is such a scarcity, and public banks can really help intervene in that. And that's partly because the public banks can integrate a lot of the different programs that exist right now are like basically in like different silos. And if a government, for example, is able to streamline those upstream, it would become more efficient to produce energy efficient, affordable housing or preserve affordable housing and make it energy efficient. So that's an idea that we're currently exploring and seeing how we can implement it, and doing some more research on it. But those are some examples of like some ways that public banks can help environmental justice communities. Yeah, I think that's kind of like what I wanted to share at this moment. There's a paper that I co-wrote with another collaborator that we're going to distribute more widely about this soon. So just stay tuned about that. And yeah, I don't know if there's other questions I can answer.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. That's great. If there's any questions specific to Sylvia, now is a great time, and I think we might have some questions that are great for both panelists, Reina as well.
Yeah, Mark asks a couple. Actually, why don't we? I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's got a couple questions that could maybe keep this conversation going in a good way. Mark, try to unmute yourself now.
Hi, Sylvia. This is Mark Lee. I'm from Santa Cruz County. I like the direction you're going in with this. It's particularly timely since we're in the middle of working with a group that's a think tank, supporting a think tank called the Romero Institute in Santa Cruz County, headed by Danny Sheehan. And we are kind of the proponents and early level legislative developers of the new California Green New Deal. So some of the areas that we're looking at, Danny has broken this down, and I would encourage you to get involved with us because we have a need not only to discuss public banking, but how it affects environmental justice, particularly in the areas of housing, solar energy credits, as FHA does provide as a down payment mechanism. If you look through the details of their housing financing legislation, but we need to become more robust in that matter. So I think the direction that you're heading is profound and very timely and very necessary. So I would encourage you to somehow, we have to link you up with our group called the Circle of 100 that meets every Friday at 7 o'clock through a Zoom meeting. And there are about 100 of us, but only about 55 of us are active. So we'd like to extend that, the public banking group, their efforts to tune in and stay in touch with us as this evolves. Great stuff, Sylvia.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I work with John Conway at the Romero Institute in the California Green New Deal Coalition. APEN is actually the founding organization of the California Green New Deal Coalition. So we've been working with Romero Institute on that.
Great. If there's other.
Yeah, anybody else want unmuted? I think we're far enough along that we're past the Zoom bomber stage. Maybe I can allow everyone to unmute themselves if we can all, participate in a professional way here.
And I actually have a question for both Sylvia and Reina. Thanks so much. Really great presentation for both of you. We've talked and you've talked about the importance of public banks from, climate and environmental justice point of view, and great investment, reinvestment, regenerative investment possibilities. But I'm wondering if you could say, what are some of the challenges you face in terms of convincing your own communities of the importance to this? And I'll preface that by saying, I work for a environmental social justice organization that works on climate change issues, and is part of the networks of groups across the country and around the world that fight climate change. And I got my start in this field campaigning against a public bank, the U.S. Export-Import Bank, which is a federal agency which provides financing for U.S. Companies to do projects abroad, including massive fossil fuel projects in developing countries. And so this is an export credit agency, and most economies around the world have these agencies. And so, you know, it got so bad to the point where we wanted to abolish the Export-Import Bank because it was so hard to reform it and stop it from financing fossil fuel projects. And so colleagues of mine are saying, you know, like, you know, what the heck? You've been fighting these fossil fuel projects financed by this public bank, and now you want to go create a public bank? You know, what's up with that? And so I've had to, you know, explain to colleagues the importance of it. And I think Reina hit on one key part of it earlier when she said that the importance of local control of these banks and local involvement in these banks from their inception. I'm paraphrasing here, but from their inception through to their operation. But I wonder, Sylvia and Reina, what kinds of challenges do you face in your communities in terms of convincing people of the importance of public banks?
You want to go first, Sylvia?
And
yeah.
how do you overcome it?
Yeah, I think one thing that is probably common across a lot of different communities is the general kind of discomfort with financial subjects. Like, people are often just kind of scared to engage in that conversation because they don't feel confident. They might feel like they need to be an expert on banking to have an opinion. So I think a big part of it is making people feel empowered to talk about like how these systems affect their lives, and that is in itself, like that personal expertise is really important and valid. And yeah, also want to definitely agree that the piece about just staying engaged, you know, they're like the saying about how democracy is a verb. Everyone, like a big part of like what we do at APEN is like this organizing year round, you know, not just around like election time, but like making sure that our community members feel like they can, they have a say. Sorry, my dog is barking. Yeah, just making sure that people are engaged in different ways in their communities.
And I think I echo Sylvia. I think the biggest challenge is just demystifying what a public bank is and what does it mean, right? And I think the legislation's like really nicely worded, but they're words that are a little out of reach for our community, but they're intended for legislators. So we don't talk about public banking in the same way that we would the legislation. And I think that's been our biggest challenge, but not a challenge at all. Like I said earlier in the presentation, pretty much once you get past that uncomfortableness of talking about money, once you really explain the grand scheme of things, that all it means is just taking the money that goes somewhere else to cause harm is now coming into the community and staying in the community, being used to, like, you know, have that regenerative economy. It's really not that difficult. And so, I mean, I think those have been the only challenges that we've faced.
Great. Other questions? I have another question, but of others.
Before this session is over, I would like to hear comments from someone on how we can advance the bill that is currently in the California legislature.
That would be a good question for folks here that are actively involved in pushing the bill, I think. Anybody want to take a crack?
When we reconvene at 12:30, that AB 310, the new proposal, will be a big part of the agenda. I think if you after our lunch break, if you tune back in at 12:30, you should be able to hear a lot about the planning that's coming your way.
Thank you.
A question I have for Reina, Sylvia, or anybody is that, you know, within our communities and circles, we're building support for it for environmental justice reasons as well as climate change reasons. But the environmental movement is a misnomer because it's a lot of different communities pursuing a lot of different things. I know that, for example, at Friends of the Earth, we have a food and ag program who's very interested in public banks for the possibility of providing, supporting regenerative agriculture at the local level and supporting healthy foods in schools. Within all the huge number of other circles and communities of people dealing with environment and social justice, I wonder, are there any communities out there that are sort of obvious next allies that you think we can recruit?
I'll take a stab at that question. And I think what I will say is that the common denominator is money, right? Or lack of money. And I think, like I said earlier, I think that was the way that I found that it was easiest to get to any problem that was thrown in, like, or any question was, well, that's a lack of money and it's not accessible equitably. And so again, the solution kept going back to being the public bank. I saw in the chat earlier, somebody asked what pots of, or like what are focus areas. And the beautiful thing about AB 857 was that it gave full control to the locality to decide those things. And so here in San Francisco, we've decided education is one. We've decided affordable housing is another. We've decided that infrastructure is another, that prioritizing small businesses is another. And so depending on what the needs are locally, that's kind of where we focus. To touch, there was another question that was asked. What is going to be important in championing AB 310? And I think it's going to be the same thing with AB 857. With AB 857 was building enough momentum and showing that there was enough need and enough want for that to pass. And that was what made it hard for the pushback. I think because it wasn't just lobbyists that were up there lobbying for AB 857, it was community members. It was people calling their elected officials. I don't think anybody else had that going for them, you know, taking 200 organizations and, you know, sending it up there. So I think it was people power really that won AB 857. And the only other thing that helped us, I think, was that Wall Street doesn't really have a good reason for why we shouldn't do this. It's all fear mongering, right? But the more we were able to go up there, I feel like that was the pushback. And I think that's what's going to be needed for AB 310 is for all of us to tap somebody, everyone on this call. If you take 59 people and you tap 2 people to call a legislator to say, hey, I support this, I think that's what's needed, is just to spread the word and use our collective muscle to push that forward.
Thanks. And I've always had to laugh when we hear Wall Street's argument against public banks because it poses a risk of like corruption. That's pretty rich coming from Wall Street. Sylvia.
I was forgetting that the afternoon session is in-house and not a public meeting. So maybe we could toss it back to Sylvia and Doug to hear a quick update on plans coming to the Assembly on AB 310.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with what Reina just said. I do want to point out that the new bill, AB 310, so we had introduced it last summer. That was the last session. The new session is going to start on Monday. So we're waiting for it to be reintroduced. We're planning on keeping the same number. So Assemblymember Santiago is going to be the primary author. His office is basically waiting on like when 310 comes up. so that we can get that same number, and they're still in like the mid 100s right now. So we're waiting for that to come up for it to be like officially introduced. It might be introduced with like spot bill language, so that meaning like not the final language, because we're still in talks with stakeholders to figure out what is the version, like the substantive version that we're going to introduce. In the legislature, you know, you can introduce, often it'll be introduced as an intent, like spot bill language, but you need to be careful about like the politics of like the substantive language, because, you know, politics. We're not sure yet when we'll have the like official introduction with that substantive language. We're trying to do it as early as possible though. And then in terms of like other kind of coalition members, beyond like the environmental justice community that we've been talking about, I think definitely it's the case that like anyone who, you know, any sectors that are like kind of facing that financing problem, which is a lot of sectors. But I think one thing that we have identified so far is like local governments. So like one thing we're looking at for this state bill is increasing lending from the iBank to state and local governments at a cheaper rate. So that's certainly something that local governments really need right now. So that's one thing we're looking at. And we're also looking at ways to incorporate incentives from the federal government, like federal loan guarantees. And we've also developed language about like loan guarantees for worker-owned enterprises, including like ESOPs, and not just co-ops. So there's a lot of things out there that we're in conversation about, but nothing is finalized yet. Stakeholders, the stakeholders that we're talking about at this point are state level elected officials. So meaning like the treasurer's office, the controller's office, the iBank, and DFPI, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. That's the new name for the DBO, which used to be, well, anyways, they're the state regulator for banks.
Sylvia, I know that one of the problems with the, in the last section was that it was, what was possible with legislation in general was greatly truncated because of COVID-19. I think that if I recall, the number of bills being able to be introduced and considered was really shortened. Is that the case this time around again still?
Yeah, and I think it's still going to be somewhat in flux, but what I've heard is, I think, at least on the assembly side, that all members can, like, there's no limit on how many bills they can introduce, but there's a limit on the number of bills that can move to the next house. So I think that number is 10 or 12. So that's another thing in play. We will likely see some similar disruptions as last year. I think like one big disruption last year, one limit was just like the number of days that the legislature had to meet and hold their hearings and stuff. So that's going to really depend on, how the pandemic plays out and like how the legislature is able to accommodate that. Because a lot of bills died last year because committee chairs just decided not to hear them.
Yeah, and I always found it ironic that some argued against advancing the bill last year because, we need to focus on COVID. It's like, wait a minute, what better way to work on COVID than to find ways to finance local responses to COVID and, rebuilding a regenerative economy afterwards. Getting close to the end of the hour, are there other questions?
folks, while these plans get made, there is local organizing still happening in your neighborhood. Here in San Diego, we're waiting to hear if we've been included in the city's year-end budget priority memos. It appears that that will happen, and it will trigger a study from our independent budget analysts. So you're going to start hearing about some of the local organizing soon. I know in Oakland, they're very close to commissioning an economist to write their business plan. In Los Angeles, they are searching for a new champion for their cause because of the changes in office holders from the last election. But all of there are 10 groups organizing from the Oregon border all the way down here to San Diego, and new groups forming all the time. We are working with a consultant in Sacramento who shared recently that there are cities interested in public banking that are completely off our radar. We had no idea that there are officials in Carson that are interested in public banking. And so you're going to start to hear about, as we work behind the scenes on our inside game on AB 310 up in Sacramento, there's plenty of ways to get involved here in your community, in your region. And this organizing continues. Also, we're on the brink of a brand new Congress that will maybe actually consider some of the public banking bills before them. So this is happening at many levels, on the federal level, in Sacramento, and right down to on your block. So don't be shy about getting involved. Everybody here, and it has been mentioned already today that you don't have to be an economist. You don't have to be a number cruncher. Reina is nodding her head along, right? This econophobia is a serious thing. When you talk to folks about this, their eyes will glaze over and they will become intimidated. But you don't have to be any kind of, math genius or financial expert to become involved with this project. It really boils down to economic justice. And, and no matter what your thing is, whether it's, Friends of the Earth, Green New Deal, or if you're part of a YIMBY group that's working on affordable housing, or if your own community is, has been devastated by COVID and you want to see it built back right, all of these things, the bottom line is always the bottom line. And that's how public banking is so intersectional with everything we're doing. No matter what your pet project is, it's going to take funding to make it happen. And this is a brand new way to do that here in California anyway. Doug, do you want to wrap it up and thank your speakers, and maybe we should think about calling it quits here today?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And thanks so much, Reina and Sylvia, for your really great presentations. Awesome to hear what you're up to and campaigning on. Thanks to all the great questions and participation by everybody here, and wonderful to see you all on this bright Saturday. At least it's sunny here. I don't know where you are, but things are sunny here, so we're on to a sunny new future. All right, thanks so much, everybody, and Jeff, thank you as well.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for spending your time with us this morning. And I know there were questions about, will this presentation be available? Once we can figure out where a Zoom recording goes, what it becomes, I'm sure we'll be able to share that on our social media. And Kimbria was mentioning a way that you can log into you can preserve the chat in there if you want to keep the links that we were sharing in there. And make it a goal to become involved with your local group that's organizing. There are incredible leaders all across the state and in your neighborhood. Everybody, thanks so much.
Did you say a Zoom discussion would continue at 12:30?
And I was forgetting that is a in-house meeting between the organizers, and so that is actually not one that will be made available to the public. But as we make decisions in that meeting, we'll be sure to disseminate that info to everybody. So you'll hear about what we've come up with. Some of this is just too boring to subject you to. We're going to go through some of our in-house procedures and some of our governance policies. I'm afraid it would put everybody to sleep if it was
Thank
something
you
we.
for sparing us.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Folks, thanks for your attention today. Everybody, all our speakers, great presentations. Thank you for being part of this movement. I noticed in the chat, somebody said we can't go without mentioning the work of Trinity Tran. She's an incredible organizer out of LA who usually would be doing the MC role that I'm playing today, but she had a prior work commitment to attend to this morning. But she's an amazing organizer, incredible person who has pretty much single-handedly kept this whole thing going. She's the cat wrangler that keeps us all on task, and you know, from 700 miles across and dozens of people, she keeps us all working. And this group is really, you know, I know Dave mentioned it earlier this morning. This is an amazing crew that's doing incredible things. I've never worked on any project that seemed to have supernatural forces on our side. It's almost like God likes public banking. It's if you haven't become involved yet, do it, because you're going to experience an amazing group of people and some incredible successes and a really amazing way to help the people of California, help your friends and neighbors. Let's kick Wall Street to the curb. Let's do this in-house, and let's make some money. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, y'all.